Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So today we have a special guest. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with our book club, it's New Possibilities Book Club. Uh, it's a page on Facebook. I encourage you all to like that page and follow that page. I will post a link to the page in the comments and in the description box to this video so you all can tap into this book club. And today we have a special guest. We have Natiki um, Hope Pressley. Natiki Hope Pressley. She is the daughter of author Sam Greenlee. He's the author of the book, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. It's a powerful, controversial book that was actually put into a movie. And we're going to talk about what this book is about, provide a brief overview of what the book is about. But that is the book that our book club will be discussing this Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Zoom. And we will have a special guest again. Ms. Pressley will join that discussion as well. We'll be raising all kinds of questions about this very controversial and powerful novel. And I hope that you all can join me. I will also post a link to the invite to that meeting so that you all can join that discussion. All are welcome to the discussion. I'm sure many of you have read this book a long time ago or even actually saw the movie. So let's get right into it. So to begin with, I would like you to introduce yourself to the audience, let people know a little bit about yourself, about your history, your background, and everything, and then we'll go right into the discussion.
Oh, sure, great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so grateful to be here to share, to talk about my father and his work and his legacy, which is what I've been doing over the last several years since his passing. My name, like you said, is Natiki Hope Pressley. I was born and raised in New York City, and my father is originally from Chicago. Sam Greenlee is from Chicago. And I spent a lot of time there in Chicago with him as well. But my background is pretty much I went to Howard University. I later studied and got a master's of business at Nyack College, upstate New York. And honestly, spent most of my time and career in education, working specifically with high school students who are attempting to navigate the college, college process, college application process, as well as just kind of figure out their life. And so I spent a lot of my time dedicated to students and helping them to find their place and live out their best lives. So that's my history. I have a daughter, Nyla, who is 28 years old, and a grandson who is not yet two. And I have a husband, family, just blessed, just grateful. So that's it. I think that's about all there is about me. So
Thank you for that. And so I wanted to ask you about this book. I mean, I've recently found out that you did the introduction to the book. And before we get into how you came to write the introduction to this book, can you provide the audience with like a basic overview of what The Spook Who Sat by the Door is all about? What are some of the main themes in the book?
I mean, the main theme of the Spook Who Sat by the Door is the fight for freedom and justice. The subtopic is race, along with um, dealing with issues specific to certain areas, the Midwest specifically in Chicago. But essentially, this story is about the fight for freedom and justice, and then what it takes and what it requires to get it, and what that looks like. Because honestly, we're still fighting. So the honest truth is, we're all still trying to figure out what that really looks like. I mean, since the supposed emancipation of slavery, I think we've all been searching and seeking out what to live free would mean in the United States of America for Black people. So it's
Yeah.
exploratory as well as definitive to some degree. But yeah, the book the book gives you a lot of information about strategies. And we'll talk about it as you ask me more questions. I don't want to give it all away, but we'll talk about some of those subtopics and some of those messages that were in that book clearly, that may not be obvious to some, but
Right. So you touched on a lot of the themes, but like just for people to get a grasp of like the plot,
yeah.
I'll just give people a general idea. So you have the main character, Dan Freeman. He
Hmm.
goes to the CIA. Like he's actually recruited to possibly join the CIA.
Yeah.
And basically, this is a result of a struggling politician
Yeah.
who's trying to look for a way to get more votes and more support, and particularly among African Americans. So
Yeah.
what he wants to do is like call out the CIA for not having African Americans as
Hmm.
a part of their unit.
Hmm.
And so Freeman ends up being recruited. He goes through the process of training and stuff to join the CIA. He gets all this advanced military training and stuff like that. And he joins the CIA for a period of time. He eventually succeeds and becomes a member of the CIA.
Yes.
And while in the CIA, despite all this talent, all these skills and intelligence that this brother has acquired, he's basically relegated to a menial type of position where he's making photocopies and stuff like that,
Yeah.
despite all this advanced training and stuff.
Hmm.
So what happens is, after being in the CIA for like 5 years, he decides to leave the CIA and he goes back to Chicago.
Hmm.
And from there, he decides that what he's going to do is train gang members on how to use military strategy to fight against their oppressor. And that's just a basic overall,
That
summary
is,
of like the
yes,
plot.
that is a summary of the plot. Yes, 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 yes. So my
And so it was,
apologies for not
oh,
giving
sorry.
that up, but I was just really trying to give a really general overview of the story and the intention, but absolutely correct, in that, the story is about the main character, Dan Freeman, and his journey from, like most of us, the journey that goes from learning and wanting to accomplish in a certain environment, and then realizing that there's greater value in going back to our communities and uplifting and empowering others. So, and the conversation about this book is more about, is this an intentional thing? And I think from the beginning, this is more of an intentional thing. Dan Freeman went in with the intent. So, and that's part of the strategy, or what my family and I call spooking. That's part of the strategy, is to always have a greater goal, than.
Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit more? Like that whole concept of spooking
Yeah.
and just about this book was very controversial at the time. And
Yes.
actually when it became a movie,
Hmm.
they tried to shut it down, so that it wouldn't, get widespread, viewership and support and all that kind of stuff, because it really dealt with like a very controversial subject, which is armed struggle at a
Right.
time when you had organizations that were actually fighting for Black liberation in this
Yeah.
country,
Abs-
organizations like the Black Panther Party and
Absolutely.
others that
Yeah.
took a more militant stance. So yeah, if you can go into detail about that, like the whole spooking concept and how you all implemented it in your family and stuff, and just about like how people can really implement it in different ways, not necessarily going around of
Exactly.
Dan Freeman.
Right. And that's the beauty of literature, right? Is that we can see things and then look at kind of some of the metaphors, and try to understand exactly what is being communicated. And clearly, my father's message is not just to take up arms. That's just one form of revolt. But revolution is bigger than just picking up a gun. Revolution starts here, right? And so I think one of the things that was critical for Dan Freeman was not just his journey, literally on the steps that he took and places that he went and decisions that he made, but literally the transforming of his mind and his thinking, which is why spooking is so critical, because it is a journey. It is a transformational journey into discovering who you are and finding your freedom, and finding your own space, and fighting the fight that you've been given to fight. So everybody's not, going to go to the CIA, right, and learn about advanced military strategy and then come back and teach it to your community. But everybody has a place and space in which they are growing and learning and developing. And it's about spooking is essentially about bringing all of that back, whatever that is. If you are in banking, it's about bringing that information back to your family and community. If you're in education, it's about bringing that back. So whatever field you find yourself in, that you're fighting in that space, that you're finding a way to fight in that space to uplift and empower your community and family. So Dan Freeman, did something a little bit more literal, a little bit more abrasive, right? In terms of his level of revolt. But really what I think we're learning in reading a book like that, we're learning that the real, the real weapon that we have is not physical. The weapon is really is training our minds, so that we're not. And I had a great conversation with someone about this not long ago, Lori Daniels, who has a Sirius XM radio show, and we were talking a lot about that specific thing. We were talking about, what does it look like, and and how do we still spook in our own ways, and how do we use this concept and use these strategies in the space that we occupy. And I say everybody has a space that they're occupying that they can quote unquote spook in, where you're gaining all the information and knowledge that you need, and you're bringing it back to empower others. The measure of your greatness is not how great you are, but how great you make others. And so if it's just about you, then it's not big enough. The dream is not big enough if it's just you. So that's essentially what spooking is. And that's, I think, if my dad and I had numerous conversations, but I think knowing who he is and knowing the things that he shared and talked about, he was more interested in empowering people so that they can be free here first, and then be able to be liberated in other areas. So did I
Yeah,
answer your question? I hope so. Because I can go on for days about this stuff. I know.
yeah, feel free. And I think that's a great point about like people using their training basically to liberate their people in different kind of ways. Like one of the most obvious examples for me is like as an attorney, I'm a civil rights attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And, many attorneys, we learn the skills about the legal system, how to use the legal system.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is like, how are we using these legal skills? Are we using these skills to better our communities or to address the needs of our communities and the systemic problems that our community faces? Or are we using it, solely for our own financial gain? And it just reminds me of a quote that's like in, our office, in the office where I work, the old building. And it basically is a quote from Charles Hamilton Houston, where he basically talks about the concept of the attorney as the social engineer. And, he says that either an attorney is a social engineer or a parasite on society. And,
Wow.
we have to decide like what kind of role we're going to play, in different fields, whether that's in law or, other education. Are you using education to empower and enlighten our youth, or to perpetuate the system of white supremacy and stuff?
Yes.
So I think that this applies to every area, whether it's entertainment. Like, are you using your celebrity and your brand and your name to promote positivity, to promote consciousness, or are you using it to promote the detriment of our community?
Right.
Like some artists will use their art to promote violence and drug abuse and misogyny and all that kind of stuff. And on the other hand, others use their skills to empower, to educate, to raise consciousness among people. So I think, that whole concept that you brought up of quote unquote spooking applies to every area that people can practice in. And it's like, whether, every profession just about, like,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
question is, are you using your skills to help the community or hurt the community?
That's the question. Are you here to help or are you here to hurt?
Right. Because, I mean, if you look, there's some attorneys, for instance, who chase ambulances and are just about like trying to make money and, exploit the system, or,
Yeah, yeah,
so,
of
and then,
course.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's very relevant. And I just wanted to ask you, so let's get into the introduction. How did you come to write the introduction to the book?
Great question. So, the second edition that we did with Wayne State was born because I wanted to commemorate my father. I wanted to bring the conversation back. I wanted to continue the conversation and bring it to the forefront. And one of the ways in which, we thought we could do that is for me to write, and then I can have a conversation and talk about my introduction with people, and then also talk about my father and his work and his legacy. Um, and in addition to that, one of the things I wanted to do when I first was privileged with, taking on the responsibility of carrying my father's legacy. I mean, I went to work. I mean, you're an attorney, so you get this. I mean, right away, it was a matter of just deciphering through all of the contracts and everything that he had, and with who and with whom and for how long, and and that was an arduous task. There was a lot involved that I was unaware of, and in some cases, to be really honest and be blunt, he was mistreated, and taken advantage of, and so I felt like upholding my father's legacy was bigger than just talking about the spook was sat by the door, and the work that he's done, and all the books that he's wrote. It was more about saying, as this next generation, that we won't tolerate what was tolerated before, and that I'm coming to redeem and to restore the things that he was due, that he did not get, including the spotlight when he needed it, a conversation when it was relevant. And so I think, my fight, my fight is bigger than just his books. My fight is for, and I think we all, as Black people in America, we all understand that, years ago, you're wearing a Motown shirt, and you could talk about all the Motown artists who didn't get their due and didn't get their respect and didn't get the money that they deserved and earned. Generation after generation is fighting for more and more of what we're due. And so I think that honestly, the second edition was about rectifying some contractual challenges, as well as bringing the conversation back to the forefront. And I wrote that introduction as like a kind of like a little whisper to my dad, just kind of a private thing between us, and also allowed myself to share that with the public. And I thought it would be a really nice way for me to remember him. So, yeah.
Right. So, and you mentioned that he was mistreated and taken advantage of. Can you elaborate on that? Like, talk about how he was mistreated and taken advantage of.
I know. I'll be honest with you. My dad is from an old school of way of doing business, a way of, I mean, I think he was all about the work, and his heart was in the work. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But sometimes when your passions are just about the art, you forget about the art business. And there's the art, and then there's the business of the art. And sometimes people will take advantage of the fact that you're more excited about, your artwork than you are about, how many people are getting paid off of it. Right. So it's like I'm selling a painting. I see all these beautiful things behind you. But I'm selling something, or, and I'm not thinking about, who's getting what and how many people are getting paid before I get my money. Um, and I know that that's not something that we talk about a lot. It's not a conversation we have. We're not comfortable talking about stuff like that. We're really not, and we have to get more comfortable with saying, look, the work is speaks for itself. But my father's legacy is just beyond, goes beyond the book. It's a matter of making sure that he's getting his due diligence, and I mean his due respect, and I'm doing my due diligence, and we're ensuring that he's being treated with fairness. So in so many ways, that was my first job. My first job was to right the wrongs, because my father, when he first wanted to publish this book, he couldn't publish it in the U.S. Nobody would publish it; they wouldn't touch it, and he ended up publishing it in the UK, with Margaret Bugsby, who is still alive and well, and a beautiful woman. And and that was a blessing and a real gift to him. But when he tried to come back and and publish other books, and so many people were still rejecting the work that he had, and he would self-publish when it wasn't popular. Um, sell his own books out of his bag. He walked around Chicago selling books. Everybody who knows Sam Greenlee in Chicago knows that if he came upon you, you saw him, he'd have a nice conversation with you, and then say he wanted to sell you a book, and he would say, "I'm going to charge you $20 for my signature, and the book is free." So everybody knew that was a Sam Greenlee move, and so he did that because that's just a part of who he was, but mainly because he just wasn't being treated fairly and wasn't getting the proper respect with the publishing houses and so forth. Now, Wayne State, we've rectified a lot of that relationship challenge, and we've moved forward. But yeah, that's an important part of legacy, and maintaining legacy for sure.
So, can you tell us about his legacy? Like, how would you describe his legacy, and what do you want his legacy to be?
How would I describe his legacy? My father lived his life on his own terms, and he did not surrender to the establishment. I mean, when he made the film with Ivan Dixon, they made the film guerrilla style and grassroots fundraising. They raised money in the community, asked people for $20, $25 here and there, and raised enough money to actually produce the film because that was on his terms. And he didn't want to depend on a system that wasn't for him, and make them money and make them rich while they exploit his art. So I think my father's legacy is about living on your own terms and doing for ourselves. So I think the whole idea of the Spook was out by the door is a parallel story to my father's. He's not much different than Dan Freeman. He probably is Dan Freeman. My father served in the military, in the U.S. Army, and then the U.S. Information Agency. Um, he was like grafted from the streets, and then came up. He was a track star in the University of Wisconsin. Um, and went on scholarship to school, and he did everything on his terms. And I think that's the legacy that he left was, and I'm always reminded in my ear, I'm always reminded, is this something that I can do myself? Or is this something that I can get done with my tribe, and not going outside of that? Those are always questions I ask because I believe that's a big part of my father's legacy, and a part of what he wanted me to know and understand. Um, and it wasn't about selling your soul for dollars. So yeah.
Right, I hear what you're saying. And you mentioned that he had other books. Like, what are some of the other books that he had or that he wrote? And is Wayne State going to publish any of his other works?
So I think we're gonna Spook the Sat by the Door is been with Wayne State for a very long time, over 30 years, I want to say, maybe even more. And so they're gonna hold on to that until we're done in terms of our contract. But Baghdad Blues is another book that he wrote, which I'll have be, it'll be coming out again. I'll be self-publishing that. Um, right, based on the conversation we just had. But I'll be self-publishing that, and then some other works that he has that are no longer really in print, that also will be coming out, as well as a book that was unpublished, which was his memoir that I'll be completing and then publishing. Do I have any of those? I'm sorry that I'm getting out the camera. But yeah, I thought I had his Baghdad Blues, but it'll be a different cover. But a lot of people love that book, simply because it really is kind of a an adventure story, about another character who goes through this whole process and works, with the United States military, and ends up in Baghdad and Afghanistan, Iraq, and ends up siding with the Afghanis and the people in Baghdad, and trying to find a way to find the balance to still serve in the army, but also to serve his own heart and what he thought was right. um, and it literally is a literal story too about how Saddam Hussein came to power. So under the undergirding of the story is really some history about how that all came about. It was because he literally was there. So he's telling a story from a character's point of view, but it really is his own storytelling. So, but yeah, anybody who wants to check that out, I will have that out soon. So just stay tuned. Be patient, but it's a great, great book. So.
Yeah, I look forward to reading that book because this book, The Spook Who Sat by the Door, is a masterpiece. It's like one of the most interesting and entertaining and enlightening books I've read
Yeah.
in a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to reading his other works, and especially that memoir. I didn't realize that he had a memoir. I would really be interested in that, and I'm wondering if that will be a movie someday as well. Like,
You
because I'm
just
sure
never know. You just never know. I'll be honest with you. My father would send me bits and pieces of his memoir over the last, maybe, before he passed, I would say maybe 20 years. And I would get little pieces of it. He would send to me bit by bit, like a puzzle. And so eventually, before he died, the last copy that I had is the copy that I have now. Um, and just trying to piece all the pieces together, which I have, but now I'm just trying to kind of fill in some of the ending. And yeah, it's a pretty beautiful story about coming up, being black in America, but also coming up in the Depression in 1930s, and what a city like Chicago really was like back then. Very different from the quote unquote ghettos we see now. These were slums. These weren't ghettos. Back then, it was minimal resources, even less than what we have now. But anyway, it's a great story, and I can't wait to share that.
so. Like in response to the controversy of this book and also the
Hmm.
film, like what kind of repercussions did your father face, or challenges or difficulties, like either dealing with the entertainment industry or even law enforcement, because this dealt with someone infiltrating law enforcement and engaging in a revolution.
Hmm.
So I know that a lot of people weren't pleased to hear about that, and then especially given the fact that, as you said, he was in the military and he had certain skill set,
Yes, he did.
and you mentioned his background, like a rough background and stuff like that. I'm sure, like Chicago is a city, even to this day has a gang culture. There are many gangs in Chicago and stuff, and I know that a lot of people are frightened by the prospect of gangs being politicized and awakened, and using their skill set or their mindset
Yeah.
for something else. So yeah, so tell us a little bit about like the consequences your father faced as a result of this book.
I mean, they were numerous. I can't be specific about them, but I will say that, uh, after my father wrote the book, after the movie was shut down abruptly, after it was out for a very short period of time, um, he had challenges writing more books, getting anything published. So, I'm not going to say he was quote unquote blackballed, but that's certainly what it seemed like. Even when he wanted to try to work at specific universities to teach, he was turned down for those positions as well. But again, one of the things about my dad is that, no matter what was going on, he wasn't going to relent. Like, this is what he was doing, whether he would be hired or not. He was going to live on his own terms. And it's unfortunate because I really believe that he would have had some really empowering lessons to share with young people. But he used his own, his own neighborhood as a classroom. He mentored many people, several young men and women who came up, who I hear from, every once in a while, who say, your dad made all the difference in my life. We used to chat all the time, or I'd call him, we would talk. So there was so much about him in terms of how he was extending himself that I wasn't aware of. But even though he was, excluded from the classroom, he was able to still, mentor and teach and train and share the knowledge that he had to a lot of other young people to empower them. So, I mean, the controversy, we're all going to deal with the consequences of our choices. Especially when, like you said, if you're telling truth to power, there's a price to pay for that. There's a price to pay, for truth. Truth has a price, you know. And so he was willing to pay that price, and he did, for the remainder of his life. Hmm.
Right. So we talked about, the concept of spooking, and I guess that's an example of how this book is still relevant today. But if
Mm-hmm.
you can talk about other ways in which this book is relevant, because the book took place, it took place in the 60s, late 60s,
Hmm.
70s period, when there was a lot of upheaval in this country, and in some ways I guess you could say that there still is, but we can talk about that. But yeah, there was a lot of upheaval. You had the end of the civil rights movement, and then you have the Black Power movement.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of activism at the time, and a lot of the conditions were, some of the conditions were different,
Hmm.
but in many ways they're the same. So if you can talk about like the relevance of this book today, all these years later.
The unfortunate relevance of the book, for sure. It saddens me that over 50 years later, that when I have conversations about this book, that people are talking about its relevance. Um, and the hope is that we wouldn't be talking about the relevance. We'd be talking about this, something that happened a long, long time ago. But unfortunately, we're still living in that. Yeah, as far as spooking, that is certainly a practical way to apply the things that you see in the book. But in terms of its relevance, certainly it is a way, a snapshot for us about the way that things were and then the way that things are. And if we compare these two things, the unfortunate truth is that they look very similar. That we are still dealing with issues of brutality, police brutality, racial injustice, economic disenfranchisement, and a host of other things. Even the same issue in terms of dealing with issues on the job and career and not being able to advance, past certain places. That these are things that we're still living in the realities of. And so the relevance of this book is that literally when you look at this book, when you read this book, you're looking at stories and you're certainly going to look at it and say, yeah, that's still happening, or yeah, that's how I feel. You're going to identify with the character. Dan Freeman is a for everybody who's Black in America can identify with some portion of his life. Even the conflict between him and his old time girlfriend, you know, and the difference in how they see the fight for justice and the fight for racial equality. And then on one hand, she believes that the best way to fight against the system is to elevate, is to advance. And he feels like the best way to deal with the system is to fight against the system. And so this constant conflict that we all, I'm sure, have come across in our lifetime, those things, when you read this book, you're going to stop and say, wow, even the issue of classism is addressed in this book. You know, I laugh with, some of my friends when we talk about, there's a very important part of chapter 2 where he's in this class, and I'm sure you remember this portion, but he's in the class of people who've now been recruited, and they're all in a room and they're scoping each other out. They're checking each other. These are all Black people now, right? There's no white people in the room. So these are all Black men. And what happens in the room? Well, what happens is they start to figure out who's who and what's what and who knows who. And you frat, you not frat, where you went to school, what what I mean? It becomes a thing where then it becomes about your social class and also your economic status. So you only fit in a room if we say you fit in that room. And that's not something that we're not dealing with right now. That's not something that has gone away. So my father's genius of addressing all of the issues, the multifaceted issues that we deal with Black people in America. It's not just what we fight against outside of us, it's what we fight against even within our own communities. And those are things that we need to start talking about more as well, not just the system, but the community, the dysfunction that takes place because we're so busy, trying to become and be that we're looking to separate ourselves from those people over there. I mean, one of the things I love, that what is the name of that cartoon, The Boondocks, right? You know what I mean? There's the characters. I'm not gonna say all the names because I don't remember all of it, but I'll be honest with you, it's relative. You know what I mean? Because it's like those niggas over there, and that's certainly an issue that we still deal with, right? And we're still addressing some of those issues amongst us that we're still dealing with. And so the brilliance that my father had in being able to address all of these things just in one book. I'm overwhelmed every time I read the book because I'm like, wow, how did he get a chance to talk about this? He got a chance to talk about, all these different things that we all deal with, and in such a beautiful way, in such a creative way, that you get lost in the story, and the story beyond just Dan Freeman trying to figure out what's going on in his life, but you get caught up in all the details of the story. Even identity is addressed in this book, right? It's the prostitute finding out who she is. Um, and so there's all of those things that are addressed in here that I really, even if it wasn't my father, I would have been in love with this book, whether he was my father or not, but certainly more so because of that.
So, like one of the things that he deals with in the book is like the gang culture and stuff like that, and
Hmm.
waking the gang up to
Hmm.
consciousness, political consciousness,
Yeah,
beyond the military stuff, just like
yeah,
the political consciousness.
right.
And so, what do you think about that today? Like, what do you think it will take to wake that element up in our community? This basically participated in the destruction of the community. Like, if you look at a place like Chicago, which is the scene of the book, like there's gang violence in Chicago. There's gang violence in places like Los Angeles and stuff. And you have music that proliferates and celebrates like gang culture and stuff like that. So what do you think it will take to like to liberate their minds so that they can empower communities instead of destroy communities?
I will be honest with you. I don't wholly agree that that gangs have been the reason for, or that they're the only intention is for destruction. I do believe um, that the original intent of gangs was something different than what we see today. And I think that there's a lot of the spirit of the original intent still remaining in gangs, even though a lot of that has now just gone towards violence and drugs and things of that nature. But I would say that we see a lot of that liberation happening. I mean, there's my father, there's people who perhaps maybe my age or older who were former gang members who are now teachers, who are now training. I mean, you look at the Black Panther Party, and that kind of structure, and you don't have it's not dissimilar from what you see with gang culture, and you do see a lot of you know gang members who are former gangs or even still gang members, affiliate members, who are still doing very positive things in the community. Especially this book, they love this book. I hear from people all the time who are part of a host of organizations who are like, yo, we carry this book around in our back pocket, like this is the book that we use. And so I don't want to say that we need to do this in order to liberate the gang members, because they're not, gang members are not our only trouble. um and so to politicize gang members, I think we've a lot of that is already happening. To assume that they're just not awakened because we hear about so much violence on the news is to subject ourselves to whatever the media says is happening, and that is not always the truth. And so I will say that, yeah, I it would be um it would great to see a lot more, especially young people, this generation, the millennial and beyond, but to see them empowered, to see them wake up, because they are definitely victims of the times. um, Social media, and getting your money, and everything's about getting my bag, whatever. I don't know. But this kind of very singular focus generation, it would take a lot to wake them up, because they're distracted by 101,000 messages happening at once. You and I were able to come from a generation where there was no social media, and I'm grateful to God for that. Just so you know, right? Um, because honestly, the things that you look in social media and you say, "My goodness, this person I'm looking at right now is gonna, have grandchildren one day, and they're gonna have children of their own, and they're gonna be able to look back and say, that was you, grandma, or that was you, grandpa. Why were you holding a gun up? Why were you saying the words you said?" So it's just, I always tell my kids, I said, listen, if I had gotten a tattoo back in the day when I was gonna get a tattoo, my tattoo probably would have said "funky fresh," and that would have not been cool right now. So, it's just a matter of understanding that this is a different generation who is fueled by different things, who are motivated by different things. And how do we get to that generation? I've been asking that of that generation, every time I get a chance to, and I'm not 100% clear. I think my goal is to just continue to have conversations like the ones that you and I are having, in hopes that people are watching, and then they start to ask themselves some questions, and to get them talking would be a great, like a great achievement. But I wouldn't just, subject this to, oh, let's just talk about, gang members trying to wake up. We need some of these young folk, who are not in the gang, who are, even sitting in college classrooms and still not 100% clear on what's going on around them. So.
Right. Those are some great points. I mean, there are plenty of examples of former gang members that are doing great work in the community, that are literally doing what your father was talking about in the book, like giving back and helping to improve the community. Maybe
Absolutely.
not the military in a military sense, but in the other sense.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
like for instance, like here in Baltimore, like we have this, like we have movements against the violence in the community, and
Hmm.
many of the people that are part of those peace movements here are former gang members or drug dealers and stuff like that, and they are able to reach certain communities that other people may not be able to reach, and they're doing a lot of
Absolutely.
phenomenal work, and my hats off to them,
Yes.
and I have great respect for them. So
Yes.
I think that you make a valid point. There are a lot of former gang members that are doing the work, and gang members themselves that are trying to improve communities and stuff, but
Absolutely.
we cannot, write them off.
Yeah.
And like one thing that I thought about is like this whole concept of spooking again. Like you have so many people that actually do use their skills to help the community,
Hmm.
but then again, you have others who have basically abandoned the community, have literally abandoned the community.
Yeah.
And part of that is something, like when you talk about the class issues in
Hmm.
the book and all that kind of stuff, we still deal with those issues
Yeah.
today. So, I mean, one thing question is like, how do we reach, those people as well, like to get them to invest in their community and to be involved in the community? Because, some people, like once they get their education, they escape their community and forget their community.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
what can we do to like help turn that aspect around as well?
Well, I mean, I like to be 100% truthful when I'm sharing about things that are going on with us specifically. And, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, a lot of us do that. A lot of us have done that, have been there. And for so many reasons, some people come from communities and environments that they just traumatic experiences, and they want to escape the trauma of the community, not necessarily the people, but the trauma and the triggers of those communities. And in that regard, I understand and I get that. But in terms of trying to reach people, I think we just have to keep talking. And, some people are just that's not what they're gonna do. They just not. It's just they're not interested. No, thank you. And you have to respect that. But there are a lot of people who are saying, yeah, I wish if I knew, I wish I knew how, or what can I do? And I think sometimes that's more of the kind of people I'm hoping to reach, is people who are saying, I thought about doing something, I just don't know what to do or how to do it. And for me, that's there's more potential there for people who are open. If you're not open at all, then you're not. But if you are and you're just wondering, how or what do I do, that's the role of people who are doing things, is to show people how to do it. And show them that it doesn't have to be something huge and big. It doesn't have to be starting a whole nonprofit organization. Sometimes it's just volunteering, or sometimes it's just spending some time helping another organization do the work that they're doing, and just participate in that way. So I mean, you asked a great question. How do we reach the people in general? How do we get people to to support their own communities? Some people are doing the work, and they're doing it really well. I wish that those people would start talking more and telling us how they're doing it, because I'm working on some things myself with. One of those things is the Sam Greenlee Jr. Community Writing Center, and I hope to open that in Woodlawn, in the Woodlawn area of Chicago, where my father lived, because it's never been done. It's not something that people ever heard of. I know that if you're in a college campus, you have access to a writing center, because your tuition pays for that. But if you're not on a college campus and you have a desire or interest, where do you go? I mean, I don't have the answers either. And that's why I said, well, let's fill in that blank and give people a place and space where they can create and learn. Right. So if I want to learn about writing, if I want to write something, or if I'm just writing a letter and I need help writing a letter, then I can go to, there's generations of people who just want some help just trying to pull their words together. So this is a dream of mine, and I'm working on that with an organization, POAH, which is Preservation of Affordable Housing. They're a nonprofit organization in Woodlawn already, and I've been talking to them. So this is still in its infancy, but it's something that I'm working to develop, and some other things, scholarship programs and things like that. But that's my way of finding ways that I can connect, especially as it relates to my father's legacy. You asked me about how do I think, what do I think my father's legacy is. My father loved to write. He loved the ability to express himself in a way that, he can escape, and not have to worry about judgment, because you're writing it down and no one can say that's, don't say that. No, that ain't true. It's your story to tell. And so I think giving people a place and space to tell their stories, yeah, that would be something that I think my father would be very proud of.
So I have a couple more questions for you. So, do you think your father viewed his novel as like fantasy, or did he view it as like a real possibility?
Did he view it as fantasy? Certainly not fantasy. I think I can say that quickly. Not fan. It wasn't, fantastical. I don't think he was thinking of a new world and a place that doesn't exist. I think he was talking about something that he saw as very practical, like a literal way to fight, but also subliminally saying there were ways in which we could still execute these things without picking up a gun. So I think it was a message. It's a message. It's a strategy, is what it is. It's a blueprint, if I can say that bluntly. It's a blueprint. So it was created so that the reader can read it and say, "Oh my goodness, wow, Dan Freeman, that's the man," or whatever. But us at the same time trying to find ways for you to express those same challenges and deal with those same hurts and pains of oppression your own way. So yeah, certainly not fantasy. Um, yeah, not fantasy. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
No, no problem.
I'll call her back. All right.
So, what did your father think about like the groups at the time, like the Black Panther Party and other militant groups?
Um, in a very, very positively, that was my father's generation. That's the world in which he grew up. He became a man in that environment. I'm so sorry. So sorry. Yes. He became a man in that environment. Sorry, let me text my daughter. That is her, and it is the holiday season, and um, so yeah. Sorry, everybody. Um, whoever's watching and whoever watch later, my apologies. Um, um, but yeah, I mean, very positively. This was where he came of age. He came of age in this environment, so it was very much his experience. That's like somebody saying, what did you think about? I don't know, not you literally, but our generation. What do you think about Public Enemy, or what do you think about, Run DMC and L Cool J? What do you think about the people who is the only thing that you really knew that really represented, your generation, in this environment? So for him, I think that was where he identified, where he saw himself, where he saw the opportunity to fight against, what was fighting against him. Um, and so I think he saw those people as, those organizations as extremely positive. And I'm sure those were places and people that and still to this day know a lot of those people, and still they talk about him a lot. He had relationships with them.
So, is there anything about your father that you would like people to know that they generally may not know about him or about his legacy?
Gosh, there's so much that you don't know about Sam Greenlee, but in terms of his legacy, um, my father was someone who I admired. I think growing up initially, I wasn't his biggest fan, and that's a daughter daddy thing. Because of some of the choices and things that he did, I just didn't agree with. And him standing so firm sometimes where it was hurting him. That hurt me. But looking back on those things and saying, wow, this man stood his ground and stood firm all of his life for the 83 years that he lived. That's a long time to stand firm. Um, but as far as, my father was a regular guy. He kept his Chicago swag forever. He never lost it. He never lost his Chicago accent. I don't know how someone lives that long, travels the world, and still sounds like a guy from Chicago and uses words like bread and things like that. That nobody says bread anymore, Dad. But it's fine. Um, he was one of the coolest people you'll ever meet. He's somebody who, when you met him, you automatically was drawn to him. It was authentic. He didn't come across as disingenuous. He always came across as just real honest and truthful, even if that hurt your feelings. He wasn't a person who held his tongue. He said exactly what he said, how he said it, and sometimes with some choice words mixed in. But that was part of his charm. But I love that about him. I loved him for that. Later, it took me a time to really adjust to it, but I love that about him. That when I look back and people talk about him, they're talking about the same person. They're not talking about a different Sam from back in the day to the Sam that who was like later on in life. They're talking about the same Sam Greenlee the whole time. And I can't do anything but be proud and be respectful of that he was consistent, for sure. Yeah.
The last question is like, what impact did the book actually have on your life personally?
Wow. Nobody's ever asked that question. And that's a great question. Honestly, it's not something I ever thought about until just now, right? You asked me what did it. I guess I thought about it without, you know, articulating it, but for me, I guess it's like it's like DNA, right? It runs through my veins. So it has an impact on me sometimes when I don't even realize it does. It made me who I am, the kind of person that my father was, the kind of work that he wrote, the kind of things that he was passionate about, runs through my veins. I mean, that DNA runs through me. The book itself had impact throughout the years in different ways. I mean, as a young person, it was just I would hear people talk about Sam Greenlee, almost to the point where I was like, I'm sick of hearing that name. Like, say Sam Greenlee one more time, right? And just one more time, say Sam Greenlee. To the point that a lot of people who even knew me from Howard didn't know that he was my father. And that's a big conversation I've had with people. Like, I knew you for so and so years. I never knew. It wasn't a conversation I had. It just never came up in conversation, right? It wasn't something I would just, start off with, hey, how you doing? And my name's Natiki, and guess what? It's not my nature. So but the impact it had on my life later on was really just starting to really understand the impact that book had on the lives of other people. And then that started to change kind of my heart, not just for the work, but also for my father. And that, he made really big sacrifices, including sometimes the connection that he and I shared, because he was 100% passionate about the work. And sometimes, I wasn't first. And I know that's hard for people to admit normally, but I'm that kind of person. I'm going to tell you exactly what it is. Like that hurt. It hurt that sometimes I came second to those things. And so later on in life, as I started to understand it more, and see the lives that, he touched and the people who said it changed my whole perspective. When I hear those things, a lot of pieces of me start to kind of come together again, and I start to understand my father a lot more. But yeah, the book has done a lot. It's a constant journey. I think I'll be talking about this 10 years from now and saying the book had a different impact on me 10 years from now. So, but thank you. Great question. Thank you for making me think about that.
Thank you. So, do you plan on writing any books yourself?
That's another great question. Well, you're on tonight. What's today? Yes, you are on. Do I plan? I do. I've been, and that's another thing I think, that I don't talk about either is maybe just as much as I didn't talk about him being my father, the people that I met. My own personal writing has always been very personal. I've never shared the things that I wrote. I always wrote it just for my own personal, enjoyment and just to rediscover my own thoughts. Um, but I'm learning now to be okay with sharing that. I think sharing the introduction part of just a little brief introduction, a little bit of my heart on the page, is freeing me a lot. I'm starting to kind of get a little more free every day. But I've been writing certain things for years, and I'll finally get to publish that. So I'm excited about that. Nervous and excited at the same time because I don't usually open up myself like that with my writing to people, but to see other people reading it and having an opinion about it is going to be different for me. But yeah.
So, when do you plan to have your book released or published?
Right. Um, so I honestly don't know. I would say within the next, year or so, probably closest to the end of next year. I don't see that happening. I'm doing so much with, my father's books right now that I just haven't had the time to think about my own. But once I come down a little bit, I think by next year, sometime mid next year, I'll have more time to think more about, more critically about what I want to share. So I would say that, yeah.
So, whenever it comes out, I would be happy to interview you and talk
Yes.
about it and discuss it on the book club.
I would love that. You are already. I don't have the book written, but you ready to talk about it. I'm so excited. That is the biggest compliment ever. So yes, absolutely. You got my word on that for sure.
That's great. So, if you can let people know, like if people want to get in touch with you on social media, how can they reach out to you? Provide your social media information if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you can find me personally on Facebook, Natiki Hope Pressley, or you can find SGJ Legacy, which is Sam Greenlee Jr. Legacy on Facebook, or you can go to the website, which is www.sgjlegacy.com. So sgjlegacy.com. So you'll find a lot of information about my father on the website, and of course, some more information about upcoming events and things that we're doing there as well.
And can they purchase his book on the website, or
It's the link. The link is really to Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I
okay.
don't sell it personally on my website, but if you want to buy the book, I certainly say look on Amazon or just Google it. It'll probably come up in a few places.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining. I look forward to having another discussion when you publish your book and release it. I really
Yes, yes,
appreciate you taking time to meet and discuss this. I really appreciate it. And for people that don't know, we went to Howard at the same time. We're part of the same political group back
yes,
in the day.
yes, yes.
Um, and it's just great, connecting with you. And I have to shout out Anita, for making it happen. She reached out to you and everything. Much
Anita is
respect
the
to you.
bomb. Anita is every person. Anita is the connector. She is the people connector. She is somebody I love very dearly. So when she told me to reach out to you and connect with you, I did it right away. So absolutely.
So that's what's up. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. People that are watching it live and people that will watch it on the playback. I appreciate it. Remember to please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, and share the video, and make sure you hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings. And again, I want to encourage you to like the book club page on Facebook, New Possibilities Book Club. Peace and blessings. Have a good evening, everyone. Peace.